Kim, and thank you very much for coming. If you have any questions, come see me after the meeting. Be glad to answer any questions we possibly can. And hope you like me and come back. And do we have any of the political leadership that's here tonight? We got Haggerty's group that's here.
Yeah, I got two college students over there, Aaron and Jake.
Okay.
First time meeting Jake, but I brought my notebook this time because I realized I learned something every time I come to this group, so I had to make sure I had something to write it down.
Okay.
So thank you.
And we'll end up getting Haggerty out here.
I'm working on it. I want to.
Okay, that'd be great. Okay, we have Eva would like to make an announcement. I want to grab that microphone that's right there from in the back there.
I know that you all are familiar with the school voucher program was passed. I wanted to fill you in on a few things that have occurred since that school vouchers was passed. First of all, several legislatures said that they were offered things to change their vote, flip their vote, and pass the school vouchers. But I do want to let you know that the bill that approved the school vouchers, they approved for $771,000 to go for the school voucher program per year. And the full amount that was approved was $1.5 million, so they made up the difference by pulling money out of the career ladder funds that's supposed to go to teachers. And in addition to that, while they were setting up the vouchers, the physical review asked for months and months for details from our Educational Commissioner, Penny Schwinn, on the financials of this grant, and they got crickets, no information. Then all of a sudden, there was a no-bid contract awarded to the Department of Education, of which Penny Schwinn is over. She's pulling the same thing that she pulled in the state of Texas. We ran her out of the state of Texas for pulling the same type of stuff. It was a no-bid contract, no proposals for bid went out, and the contract that she was awarded was for $2.5 million. Keep in mind the legislature only approved $1.5 million. So I just wanted to let you know what was going on. The chairman, Hill, has requested communication records from the Educational Commissioner to submit documentation proving that all due diligence was done to show that Class Wallet, who is the name of the organization that will be administering these funds for the vouchers, they're the ones through the Department of Education that got the bid. So a no-bid proposal, no bids for proposal went out. They were awarded a no-bid contract for $2.5. The legislature only approved $1.5. Just to give you just a little smidgen of background, in Texas, Lee hired Penny Schwinn from Texas, and he told us at our conference that he hired her because Texas was the only state that didn't buy into Common Core. That's not true, but this is what she told our governor. I taught in Texas for the last 30 years. What we got in Texas was called Cisco, and all it is Common Core repackaged and renamed. It's the same thing. Then in Texas, she was a TFA and board superintendent, graduate education privateer. As Commissioner of Education, while her special ed no-bid contracts to her buddies in Texas was being investigated by the state of Texas, Lee had hired her, and when he was informed of this, he blew it off. You can sit there. Texas, he said it was of no consequence. However, the Texas says otherwise, and their investigation found her actions against policy. She also fired the whistleblower that exposed her. The whistleblower sued her, and the whistleblower has just won that case. So it seems our governor and Haggerty are cut from the same cloth because Haggerty also pushed this person. Thank you.
Okay, that was some great information. You had talked to me about it beforehand. And one of the things we can do as a Tea Party is to let the governor know what we know that he is not doing. He has promised that if anybody on his staff lied, that they would be fired. And so here we have one of the major positions, the education, is not doing what she's supposed to do, so we ought to be sending notes to the governor. I do all the time, and I hope you all correspond to him all the time. Don't forget to go to our website, crosscountypatriots.com. And now Katie's going to pass the basket. That'll help us fund some of the things we've done. We did fund one of the American Legion Girls and Boys State. Katie and I did the other. So that helps us, and we'll be looking to do things for the election. And next is Ray Morgan, that's going to be doing the history lesson for today.
Thank you. Okay, usually I see a lot of new faces for those who haven't been here before. I usually do a 15-minute segment on the Constitution, and what I typically do is take one little small focus on it and hit that real hard and kind of explain it. What I'm going to do today is back up a little bit and really give you more of an overview, because I think the more I thought about it, you know, if you really understood what the founders were trying to do, it makes you able to understand the Constitution a whole lot better. So let's back up and just give a broad overview of what they were trying to do when they did the Constitution. First of all, the founders talked about two extremes of government a lot. Anybody think of what those two extremes of government? If you have a continuum, you have something on this end, something on that end. Any ideas? Well, on this end would be tyranny. They called the king a tyrant, right? So this end was tyranny. What would be the other end? Anarchy, exactly. Okay, so those are the two extremes of government they were talking about. And what happened, obviously, we fought a war to throw off a tyrant, which they thought the king was. But, unfortunately, the Articles of Confederation that they made in 1777, it was kind of thrown together pretty quickly. That tended towards anarchy, because the government that was set up by the Articles was pretty weak, had a lot of faults to it. There was no executive, no judiciary. They had no real taxing power. They had no enforcement power. Each state had one vote, and it took 9 votes out of the 13 to get anything done. So basically, it was very much of a disaster. So that was where they were when they called for the Constitutional Convention. And what they were trying to do was find that happy medium between tyranny and anarchy. Okay, so they're trying to find that middle ground. So when they met, that was one of their main focuses. Let's find the middle ground. So what were their goals, and what was their source of wisdom? Well, of course, when all the delegates to the convention showed up, they all had a lot of different ideas. And of course, there was a lot of discussion back and forth and a lot of compromises that went on. But one thing they all agreed on was that the best form of government for our country was a Republican form of government. Okay? By the way, hopefully you all know we are a republic and not a democracy. Okay? It's one of my pet peeves. I hate that. The founders really didn't think much of democracies, and I won't get into that, but we are not a democracy. We're a republic. But the big question is, where did they come up with that? Why pick a republic? Why did everyone think that a republic was the best form of government? Where did they get that idea? Well, it wasn't from, obviously they studied the Greeks and all that, there were republics, but it goes back further than that. The idea for a republican government is found in Exodus 18:21. It says, "But select capable men from all the people who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens." So that's a republican government in a nutshell. just a couple quotes. Noah Webster, everybody know who he was? The first dictionary, right? Noah Webster. He was kind of the second generation of the founders, and he was he did a lot of things that he's known for the dictionary. But he said our citizens should early understand that the genuine source of correct Republican principles is the Bible. Benjamin Rush. Who's heard of Benjamin Rush?
Yeah.
Okay, hopefully, you know, he was the third most prominent founding father, according to his own peers, only behind Washington and Franklin. Nobody knows about him today, because he said too many things that are not politically correct, like this. I have always considered Christianity as the strong ground of republicanism. Okay, so that was one concept, you know, kind of the main concept that it would be a Republican form of government. But where else did they get all their ideas? Someone threw out, well, the Greek, you know, the Greek republics and stuff like that. Yeah, they looked at all that stuff. But actually, a contemporary study was done back in the 80s, and they looked at all the founding documents, and they narrowed down 3,000 direct quotes that the founders quoted when they were making their discussions. And they kind of tallied them up. Where did they come from? And from individuals, the three big most quotes were Montesquieu. Everybody heard of the Baron Montesquieu, Frenchman, political scientist. He had 8% of the direct quotes. Blackstone, William Blackstone, a English political scientist, he had another 8%. And John Locke, everybody's heard of him, right? He had 3% of the quotes. But there was one source that was far and above, way higher than all of those. And it wasn't an individual, what was it?
Bible.
The Bible, of course. Okay, 34% of the direct quotes came from the Bible. And then if you read guys like Montesquieu, Blackstone, and Locke, you'll see that their arguments all came from Scripture as well. So basically, the foundation of our republic, of our nation, was built from Scripture. Just a quote from Montesquieu again. Society, notwithstanding all its revolutions, must repose on principles that do not change. The Christian religion, which ordains that men should love each other, would without doubt have every nation blessed with the best civil, the best political laws. But these next to this religion are the greatest good that men can give and receive. So in essence, the founders embodied what they called natural law, which came from scriptures, what they talked about in the Declaration, into our Constitution. Really, and what did that mean? They meant that the law of God was higher than the law of man, that there had to be a higher standard than man, and God's standard in Scripture was that authority. James Wilson, anybody heard of him? He was a signer of the Constitution, one of the original Supreme Court justices. He said, human law must rest its authority ultimately upon the authority of that law which is divine. Far from being rivals or enemies, religion and law are twin sisters, friends and mutual assistance. Indeed, these two sciences run into each other. It's a far cry from what we are taught today, right? At the convention, again, there was lots of different ideas, lots of compromises, and really when it was all said and done, everybody walked away and no one was really happy because no one got really exactly what they wanted. It wasn't until later that they started realizing the genius of the document that came out of that. And again, Benjamin Rush said, I do not believe that the Constitution was the offspring of inspiration, but I am perfectly satisfied that the Union of the States and its form and adoption is as much the work of a divine providence as any of the other miracles recorded in the Old and New Testament. James Madison in Federalist 37 also said, the real wonder is that so many difficulties should have been surmounted, and surmounted with a unanimity almost as unprecedented as it must have been unexpected. It is impossible for any man of candor to reflect on this circumstance without partaking of the astonishment. It is impossible for the man of pious reflection not to perceive in it a finger of that almighty hand which has been so frequently and signally extended to our relief in the critical stages of the revolution. So again, I think that, personally, I think that our Constitution is a great document because of the foundation of Christian principles and all the prayer that went into it. So, what are the basic themes of the Constitution? You can list a few, but just want to give you one. George Washington and John Adams both said that they thought the most important verse in the Bible that described our Constitution was Jeremiah 17:9. Anybody have Jeremiah 17:9 memorized? No. You've probably heard it when I read it. It says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it?" Wait a minute, what has that got to do with government? Well, it has a lot to do with government because what they understood was the corrupt nature of man, the fallenness of man, the sinful nature of man. And so, realizing that, they said, okay, if man is corrupt, and y'all can finish this quote from Lord John Acton. It says, "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts." Absolutely, right? So they understood that. They understood that power corrupts, and that they did not want to give any one person or one entity too much power. They wanted to have a balance of power, limited power, and a distribution of power. So that is the main emphasis of the Constitution. Madison again said, "It may be a reflection on human nature that devices, meaning the checks and balances of power, should be necessary to control the abuses of government. But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary." So again, you contrast that with the French, and they thought, oh, the humanist concept that, you know, man is good and everything's good, and what did they do? They concentrated power in very few people and entities, and what they did, the reign of terror. So, limited government is the key. How did they limit government? Well, as I've harped on so many times, they limited government, the federal government, by the use of enumerated powers. Hopefully you all have heard that term before, enumerated powers. You look at Article 1, Section 8, it lists all the powers given to the federal government. So what they meant was, these are the powers that the federal government can do, and remember, they're trying to find that happy medium between tyranny and anarchy. They said, we'll give the federal government these powers because these are the only powers that we really feel are necessary at the federal level, and everything else is reserved to the states. So very few specific powers, okay? So a limited government. Madison again in Federalist 45 said, "The powers delegated to the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite." And this was further amplified by the 10th Amendment that said if it's not specifically written in the Constitution as a power for the federal government, it belongs to the states or to the people. So they limited the power of the federal government by saying these are the only things that you can do, and that's it, period. Okay, everything else belongs to the states. So they had limited government and separation of powers. How did they separate powers? Well, most of us take the three branches of government for granted these days because we've had it for so long, but it wasn't taken for granted back then. Montesquieu said, "When the legislature and executive powers are united in the same person, there can be no liberty." So again, they want to separate the powers. So we all know how they did that at the horizontal level between the three branches of government. By the way, are all three branches supposed to be equally powerful by design of the Constitution? No, you've heard that probably, but listen to Madison again in Federalist 51. He said, "In Republican government, the legislative authority necessarily predominates." In other words, the legislature is the one supposed to have all the power. They make the laws. All the executive does is enforce the laws, and all the judiciary is supposed to do is decide on individual cases. By design. So, if the legislature is the most powerful, or should be the most powerful, what's supposed to be the weakest branch? Judiciary, yeah. Again, in the Federalist Papers, Hamilton said The judiciary is beyond comparison the weakest of the three departments of power. The general liberty of the people can never be endangered from that quarter. Well, of course, he got it, that last part he got it wrong because of the expansion of the judiciary. But if they stayed in the box that they were designed to stay in, they would be the weakest branch, and we wouldn't have any problem from it. So we have limited government by enumerated powers. We have separation of powers on the horizontal level with the three branches. There's another way we separate powers as well. And that's our federal system, and that's what all too often is just thrown under the rug these days. Okay, they designed a federal system where there was a federal government at the top with specific limited powers. If you think about a pyramid or a triangle, they're the little piece on top. And then the state governments, and then the biggest and the most control over our individual lives should be what? The local government. Okay? And that was by design. Okay, that's the way it should be. Jefferson said, I believe the states can best govern our home concerns and the general federal government our foreign ones. In other words, the federal government is really just for national and international stuff. It should be in our daily lives. So basically, again, there's a check and balance between those different levels. And by design, there was tension between them. And so if one stepped out of line, the other one should kick him back into his place. If you look at a quote by Hamilton again, excuse me, it's Madison. He says it, no, that's, let me find where I am. Yeah, Hamilton says this balance between the national and the state governments ought to be dwelt on with particular attention, as it is the utmost importance. It forms a double security to the people. If one encroaches on their rights, they will find a powerful protection in the other. Indeed, they will both be prevented from overpassing the constitutional limits by certain rivalship which will ever subsist between them. So in other words, if the federal government gets out of line, the states are supposed to kick them back and vice versa. By design, that's the way it's supposed to be. Actually, Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote Democracy in America in the 1830s, he said every village formed a sort of a republic which was accustomed to conducting its own affairs. And he said, I don't really understand why anybody wants to run for national office because they don't have any power, they can't do anything. Again, that was the design, not quite what it is today. The other thing that they designed into the Constitution was the rule of law. Samuel Rutherford wrote Lex Rex, which means what? Law is king. John Locke said the freedom of men under government is to have a standing rule to live by, common to everyone of that society and made by the legislative power erected in it. In other words, there's a rule of law made by the legislature, and it applies to everybody. And you know it because it's written out or whatever. John Adams said, no man will contend that a nation can be free that is not governed by fixed laws. All other government than that of permanent known laws is the government of mere will and pleasure. Okay. And so those are major themes of the Constitution, and there's more, but just think about the limited government, separation of powers, the federal system, and the rule of law. Needless to say, our government is totally different than the limited government our founders designed. The concept of limited government is foreign to Americans today. In fact, it's so foreign that we don't demand limited government. We demand the government does everything for us, right? Especially the younger generation. It's like, gimme, gimme, gimme. Where's the separation of power? The federal government holds all the power, right? The states are just the pawns. Where's the rule of law? Well, our laws are made by the courts and federal bureaucracies now, and you know, there's so many of them we can't even tell what they are, and they change them at will and enforce them only when they feel like it. Where's the reliance on the laws of nature? Nature's God is superior to civil law. Well, today we've thrown God out of our of our public square and out of our schools, and we're reaping the consequences with a depraved and divided nation. So I would encourage you, it's really up to us, we the people, to bring back our original Constitution. So, questions or comments?
Anybody have any questions?
Thank
you very much.
All right, thanks.
Okay, now we're time for our guest speaker. Timothy Joseph is an environmentalist, but he is a fish biologist that knows more about the silver carp than anybody in this country, I think. And I thought of something just before that, if you don't mind. How many of you have watched the History Channel Washington, the movie that's coming on? If you haven't, it is fantastic. It's a 3-part movie, and it brings Washington from his childhood, and we've watched the first 2 episodes. The 3rd episode is tonight, so we're taping it, so I'll get to see it. But if you get a chance to watch that, it is fascinating to see how he developed as an individual, somebody that initially wasn't able to do things his mother taught him, and later on, as you know, he became general in the Army and President of the United States. And so it's a fascinating movie to see how he developed. But, sorry about that, but Timothy's going to be talking to us about the silver carp. I don't want to steal any of his thunder, so I'll just turn it over to you right now.
Thank you very much. Sadly, I'm here to deliver some extremely bad news. There is a major environmental and economic disaster heading our way. I'm going to explain that in detail. It's based on science and economics. It's not speculation, it's factual. That devastation is these fellas. They're the silver carp. They came from Asia about maybe 60 years ago. They were imported to clean sewage treatment facility ponds. There was a flood in the Mississippi River. They were released into the Mississippi. They've taken over the Mississippi, the Ohio, and the Tennessee River valleys. These fish can weigh up to 60 pounds. When they're startled, they jump out of the water en masse, as you can see here. They have broken jaws. They have fractured skulls. They have knocked children and adults out of boats. One woman drowned. These fish are lethal. That's just the biological side of it. The economics are even worse. Here's the bad thing about these fish. The only important thing on this slide, the laser pointer doesn't work on a TV because it absorbs it, so you're just going to have to kind of look. The single female fish can lay from 50,000 to 5 million eggs twice during the summer. That's one fish. In a good spawning year, it'll be twice. You do the math. You can see how quickly they can take over a lake. They will destroy and have destroyed the recreation of many lakes. I'm going to talk about 2 in particular tonight. This is sort of meant to be, I keep wanting to use a laser, it's meant to be humorous, but it's really not. You have to have protection to use a boat if you're going to move more than a few miles an hour. You literally are not going to be able to pull your grandkids on a tube, let alone use a jet ski or ski. You're talking about a 40-pound, 50-pound projectile hitting you in the face. They can break a neck. They literally are lethal. These are just some pictures. they will and have shut down the economic engines of recreation, tourism, property values, local government tax revenues, etc. And I'm going to talk about that specifically. This is not speculation, people. All right, a real quick study of zoology, real quick. Every single thing in a lake, from insects to fish, every single living organism in a lake is dependent on these fellas, the zooplankton and the phytoplankton in the lake. Nothing in that lake can exist without these. Silver carp are plankton feeders. They go all day long with their mouth open. They're like mini whales. And they filter feed out those zooplankton and phytoplankton. The zooplankton and phytoplankton are the foundation for everything in that lake. They're the bottom of the food pyramid, right there. Without those, nothing, and I highlight, nothing in the lake can exist. Not even an insect, let alone fish. They gobble up all day long the zooplankton and phytoplankton, and they deplete the bottom of the food chain. They don't eat fish. They don't eat minnows. They eat the most important organisms in the lake. That's the distribution. The Ohio, Mississippi River systems are inundated. They've entered the Tennessee River system, and they're heading our way. 4 months ago, I would have told you they were in Wheeler, and I was advocating stopping them at Guntersville. 3 months ago, TWRA put out a press release showing that they have now been found in Chickamauga. I turned white. So I've totally changed our modus operandi for the council and what we're asking, and you'll see that in a moment. They are in Chickamauga Lake, which means they're going to be knocking on the door of Watts Bar anytime. That area is gone. Now we have an opportunity to save those 4 lakes. But we have to act now. And you'll see what that is. And there's only one option. We can save the upper Tennessee River basin of our 4 spectacular lakes only if we take immediate action. Oh, we're talking 1,600 miles of shoreline. Over 1,600 miles of beautiful shoreline. Okay. How many of you are familiar with the land between the lakes? How many of you have been up there? Yes, most of you. It's a spectacular area. That little red dot is where my wife and I camped. That's why it's on there. Kentucky and Barkley Lakes make up the land between the lakes. They're mostly in Kentucky, partly in Tennessee. The southern half is in Tennessee. There's a border here somewhere right there. The sport fishing is gone. You can see the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Assistant Regional Director said, silver carp populations have ballooned to unmanageable numbers. Here in Kentucky, sport fishing is gone. The groups that historically flocked to the lakes have dwindled. They are catching millions of pounds. Last summer they caught 5 million pounds of carp to try to reduce the numbers with no effect. Well, if one female can lay 5 million eggs, no wonder. They're subsidizing commercial fishing. They're spending a lot of money trying to reduce the numbers to no avail. They have not improved the ecology. They have not improved the economy. It's going downhill continuously. Senator Mitch McConnell said, the economic impact of Kentucky and Barkley Lakes is estimated at $1.2 billion. This clearly shows what's on its way here. We're no different. We're not immune to this. We're no different than Barkley or Kentucky Lakes. That very same thing is going to happen here if we don't stop them. Okay, there's a thing called an acoustic barrier, bioacoustic barrier. It uses sound, it uses lights, it uses bubbles, it uses every kind of imperfect thing you can imagine to try to prevent the carp from moving. But it just deters them. About 90% of them don't like it. 10% will get through. So this barrier has its purpose, and I'll show you in a minute, but it's not going to do the job. This is what we need. We need electric barrier at Watts Bar Lake. Pardon me, Watts Bar Lock. Let me explain it very quickly. I wish the laser worked. You can see the electrodes going across. There's usually 7 or 8 of them, okay? In a big, like our lock, they almost look like they actually are railroad tracks. Okay, they're electrified, but with an extremely small voltage. In the News Sentinel about 6 months ago, the chief of fisheries from the TWRA was quoted to say, to use the word electrocution. I have that article. What a mistake. He scared people. That was the wrong thing to say. I've talked to him. I've met him. I know him. He's an intelligent guy. Why he ever used that word, I'll never know. Let me explain. I don't know if you can read it. But the first electrode is, what is it, 0.2 volts, and that's DC current. 2 volts DC. Next one is 0.6, 0.8, 1 volt, and I think the highest is 1.2 volts. I know what you're saying. Voltage doesn't kill you. Amps kills you. And you're correct. But look at the amperage. The maximum amperage at the highest electrode is 0.0045 amps. That's less than 5,000th of an amp. It can't kill you. It doesn't even kill the fish. The word electrocution is ridiculous to use in a newspaper. It shouldn't have been used. You cannot. People have swum through these barriers. If you notice, the fence just stops you from walking off the wall. It doesn't stop you from walking in the electrodes. Do you think they would be allowed? No. Oh, I'll go past this one. I'm just showing you where the amperage of the barrier is. People said, well, what does it take to electrocute you? Well, that's way down here. We're so far from being lethal. At 1,000th of an amp, you get a faint tingle, but it's barely perceptible. At 5,000th of an amp, you get a strong tingle, but it's not even painful. It cannot electrocute you. There are more than 50 of these electric barriers in the U.S. today. More than 50. And if you'll notice, you see very little fencing. Look at that one up there. You could walk right in there. That wouldn't be allowed if you could be electrocuted. Okay. Michigan and Illinois are taking action. They're building a bioacoustic and electric barrier at the Joliet Lock in Joliet, Illinois, to stop the silver carp. That's the lock, and it shows you that there's the delegation that's doing it. They put together a bipartisan coalition of governors, senators, representatives, and agencies, and they're doing it. Tennessee needs to do this. Okay. There are 2 studies done by UT, funded by TVA. One showed that the Tennessee Valley itself, the whole system, remember the whole valley, brings in nearly $12 billion a year to the economy of the Tennessee River Valley. But more importantly is the other study. It shows that each mile of our lakes brings in $1 million to the local economy. You look at everything that's involved with the recreation and the rentals and the boating and the fishing. $1 million a mile. Why is that $1 million a mile? Is it going to be when you have this, or is it going to be that? I don't think I have to answer that question. We're not going to have $1 million a mile of economic input from this. Okay, real quick. If you read the paper about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, $25 million was allocated by Congress, dedicated to address, quote, address the silver carp problem. They've done it before. Okay, where's that money going to be spent? Well, it's going to be spent like they have spent it in the past. They're going to be doing research, distribution studies, population estimates. They're going to be subsidizing commercial fishing up in the Kentucky and Barkley Lakes. None of which is going to help us here. None of which is going to help us prevent the carp from getting here. $25 million, I can assure you, is going to be wasted. Look, I'm a researcher. I have shot thousands of fish. I have tagged thousands of fish. I enjoy research. There's nothing wrong with research. But what the TWF and the agencies need to do is prioritize where they spend that money. And they're not going to do it. I can assure you they're not going to do it. They're using no decision analysis whatsoever to say, how are we going to spend $25 million? They're going to do it, oh, I think we're going to buy some more nets. We're going to get a taste study for it. We're going to sell carp. We're going to find new markets because they're catching them by the millions of pounds every summer. All that is a waste. Actually, it's not a waste, but it's not the way to spend the money when the money is short. They need to prioritize and understand where to spend that money. And this is what they need to do. They need to take and they need to look at mitigating devastated lakes by catching millions of pounds every summer with, mind you, minor short-term benefits. So minor that you can't even measure them. They don't improve the ecology whatsoever. They don't improve the property values. They don't improve the recreation. Now, you need to put that on a scale and you need to weigh that against immense long-term benefits of stopping them from reaching our lakes. We've got 4 beautiful lakes that we can protect. But they are not going to put that money on a scale. I can assure you. Look at how they've spent it in the past. They're going to do it again. $25 million is going to be spent, and not a penny of it is going to help us. Funding allocations must be based on the greatest positive ecological and economic outcome. It's called decision analysis. If you have all the money in the world, do the research you want, do anything you want. But when you don't have all the money in the world, you need to prioritize by using decision analysis to say, where do we spend that money? Where does it get the best value? Well, there is no question where the best value is. Catching a few million pounds? Or allowing those lakes to be this? The Tennessee state budget right now, thanks to wise spending on the part of our state government officials, has a $600 million budget. I've talked to them about that budget. Well, the different programs that have surpluses, they're the ones that get the money if they need it. And what they're saying is you can't get at that money. That's not true. Bill Lee, the governor of Tennessee, could pick up and say, I want $50 million of the budget. It would take between $30 and $50 million to put an electric barrier up here. That's peanuts. And what it would do? It would save that. Okay, we're going to get to the hard part. There is only one option available to save our lakes. There's only one. We have to, right now, we have to close Watts Bar Lock permanently until the electric barrier is put in. That lock needs to be shut and not opened again. Then we need to do an extensive sampling campaign to see if they are in Watts Bar. I hope they're not. I don't think they are. But we need to close the lock and find out, because if they are in Watts Bar, well, it's too late for me. It's too late for my lake. I live on Watts Bar. It's too late. They're there. It's over. So we need to build it at Fort Leaven. Correct, you guys. Then we need to install the barrier. We need to close Watts Bar lock now. Not tomorrow, not next month, not to let the state and the agencies do a bunch more talk and planning, because the time is the friend of the carp and the enemy of our lakes. Every day goes by, they're getting closer. And we need to install an electric and bioacoustic barrier at Watts Bar. But foremost, we need to shut the lock down now. Everybody's saying, oh, the navigation and everybody's going to be up in an uproar. Well, hey, listen, you know, somebody is going to hurt. Is it property owners and recreation and all of that, or is it the temporary downturn for the barge industry? And by the way, when the barge industry is suffering, the rail industry is booming. So all you're doing is you're trading the economics for a short period of time, maybe 3 years, to build a barrier. All right, now let's look at the specific economic impact on us. All right. I took this from the revenue data from the UT study and the TVA report of 2016. On our 4 lakes, we've got 8 counties. 8 counties make up the 4 lakes. Now, some lakes have 2 counties. So I've taken just the counties over there, okay? If you look at just the counties alone, based on a 50% downturn in the economy, not 100%, 50% like at the land between the lakes, and then that 50% is going to get worse every year as the carp numbers get increased. But just looking at a 50% downturn, Roane County, $193 million every year. This is annual. Anderson County, 70. Ray, 94. Loudoun County, $118 million every year. That's at 50%, and it'll increase. It'll get worse. Okay, back to this slide. We have got to close Watts Bar lock and put the barrier in, or it's all over for us. Otherwise, that's going to happen. And we are going to be another land between the lakes. We are going to be another Kentucky and Barkley Lakes. We're going to be seeing commercial fishing out here. We're going to be seeing no bass tournaments whatsoever. I've testified 3 times at 3 Nashville hearings. One was a month ago. A month ago. And I gave when I was finished with my testimony, Senator Bill Powers, his district is the land between the lakes, those 2 lakes. When I finished my testimony, Bill Powers raised his hand. He was on the committee up there. He says, gentlemen, you need to listen to Dr. Joseph. What he's saying is absolute fact. He said, my constituents are suffering. He said, we have no more sport fishing. He said, last year, we used to have 150 boats. He said, last summer we had 40 boats, and of those 40 boats, half of them caught no fish. He said, our property values are plummeting. This was from the senator. After he finished, I said, Senator Powers, thank you. I'm one small guy trying to tell them what's happening. I'm not a senator. I said, thank you, Senator Powers, because it's fact. We don't want that to happen to our lakes. We can stop it. Oh, this is only to say it's even worse than that. If we don't, this is what we're going to be doing. They're doing it now there. We're going to be having commercial fishermen out here catching the fish. You're not going to be jet skiing, you're not going to be boating, you're not going to be pulling your grandkids. You're going to be seeing that. You notice that area is blue, it's not red. People, we've got to keep it blue. We've got to stop those fish. We've got to get that blasted lock closed. All right. These are 3 quotes taken from a very extensive, very thick environmental assessment done by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Okay. There's the environmental assessment there. If the silver carp become established in additional large lakes and river systems, as they have in the Mississippi River Basin, eradication or control of the silver carp is highly unlikely, and I will say impossible. It's fact, it's impossible. And they will be considered permanent members. That's what we're going to have in our lake, and that's about all we're going to have in our lake. Reestablishment of impacted populations if, this is their quote, that bold is mine, if biologically possible, and it's not, if biologically possible, would be labor intensive, cost intensive, and would depend on, get that next word, eradication. The only way it could be recovered is to eradicate it, and it is impossible to eradicate it. Impossible. Can't be done. No effective and feasible tools are currently available to manage silver carp that are found in open river systems. They are impossible to control. When I gave my testimony a month ago to the senatorial committee in Nashville, after I was done, the chief of fisheries from TWRA got up and he said, I disagree with Dr. Joseph. I believe we can control them in Chickamauga. He is absolutely wrong. It's not me just saying that, it's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service saying that. If TWRA can control the carp, they need to say how. Don't tell me you're going to do it by commercial fishing. They haven't done it in Barkley, haven't done it in Kentucky lakes, catching millions of pounds a summer. So if the TWRA feels they can control them, they owe us an explanation of how, because there isn't a how. Needless to say, they're not pleased with me. That is permanent. That's permanent, people. I gave a talk 2 weeks ago to TVA at the tower down here in Knoxville to 16, I think it was 16 staff members and managers at TVA, asking them to close the lock. I put this slide together specifically for that presentation. Remember, I'm talking to TVA, and by the way, super nice people, very smart people. I said to the TVA, look, I have no doubt in my mind that if you knew the levee in Kingston at the ash storage area was going to be breached, you would have been out there in a second and you would have stopped it. You would have fixed it. You would have made sure that levee didn't breach. But you didn't know it. So it breached. It has cost TVA $1.2 billion. They've had 63 lawsuits involving more than 850 plaintiffs. They spent nearly $28 million for property claims. Well, guess what? I looked right at TVA and I said, that pales in comparison to the economic damage these fish are going to do. And then we talked about suits. It is against the law for anybody to transport an invasive species. Against the law. It's a state and a federal law. Transport. Okay, transport. Take them in a bucket from one lake and dump it to another, that's definitely transport. But as far as I'm concerned, TVA can stop the transport of the silver carp by closing Watts Bar Lock. They aren't physically transporting them, except they're allowing them to transport themselves through a natural ecosystem. I see no different in the law. To me, the law is saying TVA has a responsibility to stop those carp because they can. Close the lock. Take all the time you want to build an electric barrier, but close the lock. And you have stopped the transport of those fish. I'm not an attorney. I don't know what the definition of transport is legal. But as far as I'm concerned, TVA will be breaking the law by not closing the lock, and we're getting attorneys right now to look at this. Oh, by the way, the firm you gave me, they won't do it. They want $10,000 just to analyze it. So I tried to get a pro bono environmental attorney in Knoxville. They said, no, they won't do it pro bono. Our council has $2,000. They don't have 10. There's the ash bill. There it is. But that, guess what? It's been years now. The environment's recovered. I wrote an article right after the ash spill, when everybody was up in arms. I'm a limnologist, fishery biologist. I said, it's going to recover. It's going to take some time, but you know what? Lake's going to be back to normal. Ecosystems are marvelously self-healing. And sure enough, it's pretty much healed. Now, that's not healed down there, but I mean, the ecosystem has. You're not going to heal the silver carp. When they get here, it is all over forever. You cannot eradicate them. They will eventually deplete that food, bottom of the food pyramid so much that there will be fish kills. Of course, they're going to be catching, they're going to have commercial fishing, so there probably won't be a lot of fish kills because they're going to be catching them. But there's never going to be a recovery. Not ever. Because you cannot eradicate Watts Bar, Tellico, Loudon, Milton Hill. They're too big. If it was a small pond, you could rope. I've roped known ponds. I've killed every fish in ponds to clean them out and start anew. You can't do that with a big lake, let alone a river system lake. St. Anthony's Lock in Minnesota 5 years ago was closed to barge traffic permanently. Why? Guess what? Silver carp. So don't tell me, TVA, you can't close the lock. Oh, I said this to them at the meeting. They closed the lock up there for the very same reason I'm asking you to close the lock. So don't tell me it can't be done. It took an act of Congress. But guess what? Enough people got together and said, you do it. And they did. 5 years ago. Hasn't been open since. We can't close Watts Bar Lock? No, we can't. To delay closing Watts Bar Lock is going to allow the silver carp to enter the rest of our lakes, our four lakes up here. They're in Chickamauga. We can't leave the lock open while we construct the barrier because it's going to take 2 to 3 years. And every time you open it up, the silver carp are going to go through. You've got to stop them. There's over 1,600 miles of shoreline, as I said. Property values are going to plummet and all the other stuff I told you about. I've said it before and I'm going to say it again. This is not speculation, people. There's not a bit of speculation about this. The only thing speculative about this is how long is it going to take when we get here. It's going to take 2, 3, 5 years. Does it really matter? Doesn't matter if it takes 10 years before they get to those immense population levels. It's all over once they get here. That's the only thing that's speculative. Is how long it's going to take to destroy us. Not if we'll be destroyed. We will be if they get here. Period. We don't want our 4 lakes to follow that. Man between the lakes. Okay, this is what I asked when I testified 3 weeks ago in Nashville. I said, you need to go to our governor and you need to ask him, oh, by the way, I've been trying to get to the governor for over a year now, and with no luck. He needs to declare an environmental and economic emergency. He can do it. Just like if a major tornadoes went through here. You can declare an emergency. He needs to immediately close Watts Bar because of that emergency. He needs to form a coalition of all those agencies. He needs to bring down a coalition from Minnesota that's already doing this. Don't reinvent the wheel. They've invented it. Bring them down. They're consultants. Or bring them down as consultants. And then you need to do the engineering design. You need to get it built. But the most important thing is you got to start with that one. You got to close the lock now and do all the talking and thinking you want. But if you leave the lock open while you're doing that talking and thinking, they're going to be right up here. Protecting the economy and ecology of the Tennessee River ecosystem is our responsibility. We've got to close the lock now. I've said it again, and I'm going to say it again, people. This ain't speculation. It's fact. And if you don't believe me, just go back up to the land between the lakes and look at the property values. Look at the sport fishing. Look at what's happened up there. It's real. Look, is the Tennessee River system worth $1 million a month? I personally think it is. But you know what? To me, that's the reason I love it. It's spectacular. It's wondrous. And it's all these adjectives here on the left. That's why you and I and everybody else out here and every one of those boat owners love our lakes. It's for all of those reasons. It is not going to be that any longer if we let those fish get through Watts Bar and Fort Loudon. It's all over. The choice is ours, people. One last thing, I'm done, but one last thing. I met Friday, yes, this past Friday, with Tim Burchett, Congressman Tim Burchett at his office in Knoxville. Sat there, gave him a bunch of these handouts, and he said, Tim, what can I do for you? What do you want me to do? I told him. I said, I need you to help get that lock closed now. He said to me, I'll tell you what I want you to do for me, Tim Burchett said. He said, I want you to write me a 3-paragraph succinct letter on what you want. Send it to me. And it was funny. He says, I'm going to rewrite it and misspell a few words. And he says, and I'm going to get that to the president. I said, you've got it. I sent him that letter this morning. I had him last Friday. I sent that letter to him this morning. I got a reply before I came here. He said he got the letter. He is going to rewrite it. He didn't say make misspellings, but maybe he will. He said, I'm going to rewrite it. I'm going to D.C. and I will get it to the president from my office. Thank you, Tim Burchett. Now, whether it gets, he's going to, I have no doubt he's going to do it. He didn't lie to me. He didn't ask me to do it just to appease me. Now, whether it gets to the president, who knows? And if it does, is the president, I'm sorry, I wish I'd have brought the letter. In that letter, said, I wrote it for him, Mr. President, blah, 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 blah. And I said, I'm asking you to do an executive order to have TVA close the lock immediately. And I said, why? So, all we can do is keep our fingers crossed. He could make it happen. Our governor can make it happen, but I can't get an audience with him. I've had an audience with so many senators, and I gave 3 testimonies in Nashville, but I can't get to the governor. And I write to the governor, and I get these letters back, pardon me, from his staff. I don't think he's ever seen a letter. They go to the staff, and I get this nice little thing, oh, we're looking at the issue, we're very well aware of the carp issue, and we're planning to do some study. I don't want any studies. Every politician tells me that. The Tennessee, the TWRA tells me that they're doing studies. I'm over it, people. I don't want any more studies. We don't need studies. We need action, and the action we need right now is to close the lock. Otherwise, if you got a boat out here, you might think about selling it in before a few years, because they're going to be here. We're going to feel it. Anyway, I'm open to questions.
So Governor Lee will make him a one-term governor. That'll get his attention.
Well, you know, what I even told the senators, each time I testified, senators, I said, Senators, I want you to realize that if you prevent those fish from coming up to our lakes, you are going to leave behind probably the finest legacy a senator could ever leave. You've protected the entire upper Tennessee River Basin. And I said that in my closing sentence to the President. Mr. President, if you do this, you will leave behind a legacy of saving 4 beautiful lakes. That was in my letter that Tim Burchett is going to give to the President. And every one of those senators up there agreed that, well, they need to do this, but nobody is doing anything.
That's why I said you need hardball with the governor and say, don't do this and you're out.
Well,
That's not your nature probably, but
yeah, that would be meaningless. He wouldn't care what I said. I mean,
get his attention.
well, I'm trying to get his attention.
There's a question here.
Yes.
What was TVA's response after you?
Oh, thank you for asking. I forgot his first name, Bowling. Super nice guy, manager. They agreed. And I asked the question. I mean, they didn't like what I was saying about the suits. They didn't like what I was showing about the spill. But I asked them at the very end, I said, I want to ask the members of TVA here, do you not agree that if those fish get past Watts Bar Lock and they're up here, it's over for our lakes? They all said, yeah, we agree. And we talked about what it would take to close the lock. They do not have the authority to close the lock. I mean, this office doesn't have the authority. He said, I'm going to contact our attorney and see what it would take, what kind of action it would take to close the lock. They agree it needs to be closed. And I asked him, I said, would you do me a favor when you ask your attorney? Would you ask him to interpret transport? I said, your attorney, you heard what I just said about TVA allowing them upstream. To me, that's as good as transporting them. I said, would you ask your attorney what he feels about transporting by leaving the lock open? He said, yeah, I'll ask him. And I said, will you let me know? He laughed and said, I will if they tell me I can. So the answer to your question is they were very responsive. I'm very glad I went down there and hit with it. I was there for an hour and a half, and nobody disagreed.
Other than closing the lock, what is the downside to installing the barrier, other than even the cost? Is there something else environmentally about installing the barrier that people don't want to do it?
No, except people that fear getting electrocuted if you fell out of your boat. First of all, how many people have fallen out of boats going through the lock? I don't know that I have ever seen one fall out yet. I mean, the chances of somebody falling out are pretty low, but even if they fell out, they're not going to get electrocuted. They can't. So no, there's no, unless, you know, that word electrocution in the paper scares a lot of people and they believe it. They're not going to believe Tim Joseph saying, oh, and by the way, when I saw that article I wrote a big response, and thank goodness, New Sentinel published it, correcting them, explaining 5,000th of an amp. Anyway, any other questions? Yes.
Right here. No, use the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
He's the guy that,
yeah.
I'm going, go ahead.
Wouldn't it be wise to close the Loudon lock?
Absolutely. As far as I'm concerned, they ought to close Milton Hill, Watts Bar, and Fort Loudon. But I don't have the nerve to ask for 3 locks. I mean, if they close, if we get a positive response on Watts Bar, that's what we're going to do next. Because what we need to do immediately after we close the lock is do an intensive fish sampling campaign, because I'm hoping they're not, and I think they are, in Watts Bar. And if we do a real intensive campaign and we don't find them, then we don't really need to close them. But in the meantime, I say shut it down. Shut it down until we know they're not in Watts Bar. I agree with you totally.
Are those electronic barriers 100% effective?
Good question. I'm glad you asked because I forgot to explain that in there. As those fish are moving up from the 0.2 of a volt up to the 1.2 volts, what happens is they feel it. And they don't like it and they turn around. And if a fish is, real ballsy, he's going to go up a little, I shouldn't say, go up a little further, he's going to turn around. If he gets up to about 0.8 volts, that fish can no longer swim. You've heard, people get shocked, they can't let go. Why can't they let go? It's because the amperage doesn't allow, it freezes your muscles. It doesn't allow a person to let go. You cannot pull yourself away. Well, what happens is, at 0.8 of a volt, remember the fish is in that current, he's in that water, he's totally surrounded by it. His muscles don't work. So that fish is incapable of swimming, the current takes him back down, and if he comes, and it doesn't kill a fish, by the way. It never kills a fish. It stuns them, and they float back down, and they'll start swimming. If he wants to try it again, go ahead, fella. You're not going to make it. Now, here's the thing. And I talked to Brown and Root about this. They're the ones who built those electric barriers. The thing about the electric barriers is when you've got these big, huge steel barges going through, they interrupt the current. Okay? So the current will have spaces where it's not as strong. It doesn't do away with it, it just alters it. And I asked them, I said, well, when barges are going through, could you not amp up the current? He said, oh yeah. So what they would do is leave it at the 1.2 volts max when there's recreational boaters going through, but when a barge comes through, they'd ramp up the electric.
Got one over here.
Oh, so I wasn't going to do that.
So have you talked to the U.S. Coast Guard that regulates navigation, like Sector Ohio Valley?
No, I haven't. I've invited Coast Guard. I've offered to do this talk to the Coast Guard auxiliary, but I haven't heard back.
Well, auxiliary has nothing to do.
I know, but no, I have not.
Because the Coast Guard has dealt with the other locks, and
Yeah,
their R&D center has been involved with this for years. So Sector Ohio Valley oversees these.
Well, boy, I'd love to have them on our side.
Well, all you gotta do is approach them. I mean,
Well,
if you have TVA that's supporting you, ultimately, at the end of the decision, they can shut down navigation, not be closed to the lock.
well, a good idea. I'd love to have somebody head that up.
Somebody had a question over here? But everybody else can
Yeah,
hear you.
okay, all right, so if Tim Burchett is kind of on your side, can he not talk to the governor to get him bowled over? And so the only two people really that can do an executive order to close the lock would be the President of the United States and the Governor of Tennessee.
That's how I see it, and we've already asked him to do that, to reach out to the governor. And he said he's gonna.
What about inadvertent transfer of eggs, maybe alongside stuck to barges or other traffic going through, there's no problem with it?
No problem with that at all. And the reason is, these eggs They're pelagic spawners, which mean, oh, that's the other thing that makes these fish miserably fast spawners, is because they don't require nests like bass and bluegill and all. They're what they call pelagic spawners. The females all lay their eggs, the males fertilize those eggs, they immediately start hatching, and they start gobbling up the zooplankton and phytoplankton, all in the water column. Well, these eggs are in the water column. Most of them are slowly sinking, okay? But there's nothing that would make them stick to a barge or anything. So it is highly unlikely that you would ever, and remember, you'd have to have a male and you have to have a female, and everything would have to be right for it to continually mature, and that's highly unlikely. I think winning the lottery would be a better choice, so, no.
Over here.
Yeah, so I have two questions. One is the sound barrier alone versus the electric barrier. I think there's a lot of confusion out there about what the current powers that be are talking about, a sound barrier versus an electric barrier, right? And so they're not the same thing.
Oh my gosh, they're not even close.
If you can just speak to that. And then the second, is it possible to get a copy? Is this going to be posted on a website where, I mean, I've got people I'd like to share the information with, but
yes, if you go to the WBEFC website, I'm posting, I keep upgrading this thing. The one that's on there now doesn't have this recent stuff I've put on, but there is one on there. Also, we're going to be building a new website. It's just Silver Carp, and all of this is going to be on there. But you're more than welcome. I have it on. If you have a thumb drive, I can put it in here and give it to you. So that'd be happy.
It'll also be on our. This will also be on our website. The video will be on the website.
To answer your question, you're absolutely correct. The bioacoustic barrier, it has real bright strobe lights. I think you saw the picture. It has a bubble curtain, which is a visual thing, and the fish says, I don't know if I want to go through that. Well, come on. And then it has a lot of noise. They don't even know the frequency of the noise yet. They built one, I'm glad you brought this up. And get this, people. They built one last summer, this past summer. It is now operational. It's only been operational for a few months at the end of the summer. Guess where they built it? They built it at Kentucky Lake at the lock where the silver carp are on both sides.
That's insane.
$5 or $6 million thrown, and I said, and this is why they don't like me, I asked the fisheries chief, why didn't you build it in, remember, we thought at the time they were in Wheeler and not in Guntersville. I said, for heaven's sakes, Frank, why didn't you build it in Guntersville? Because you could have tested the barrier and hopefully slowed them down at the same time. You built it in a place where they're on both sides. You know what his answer was? He said, well, he's partly right, but he's wrong. He said, we need a lot of carp to try to get through that barrier, so we're going to tag a bunch of them to see if they make it through. I said, Frank, you could use silver carp in Wheeler, you could use striped bass, you could use catfish, you could use largemouth bass. I said, this is a fish barrier. This is not a silver carp barrier. It's a fish barrier. But they spent $5 million, and it's operational, and there's carp on both sides. So they're doing in there, oh, that's where some of this new $20 million is going to do. More for that research to see how many get through the barrier. You know what? I don't give a darn how many are getting through that barrier. I don't care if it's stopping 90%. They're saying about 90 or 95. Who cares? 2% is too much going through. 1%. But that's what they did. And now they're talking about putting barriers maybe in Chickamauga because, you know, the lock is down. Well, they're building that new lock. Oh, well, let's put one there. And I wrote back TWRA and I said, why? They're in Chickamauga. Don't put it in Chickamauga, put it in Watts Bar. They don't talk to me anymore.
Got one here.
Your website, is it WBSC?
WBEFC, Watts Bar Ecology Fishery Council. .org.
Is that
.org.
It'll be in our minutes. We'll put it in our minutes.
But it won't have the newest stuff, sadly. Because remember, I've been thinking they were in Wheeler. And one last thing. When he told me 2 years ago, not 2.5 now, the fisheries chief, that they were in Wheeler, which I knew, I said to him in Nashville, I said, they're in Guntersville. He said, oh yeah, we've done sampling and they're not in Guntersville. Well, no, as a fishery biologist, I'm certain. They've been in Wheeler for over 3 years. I know they've gone through. He said, no, they haven't gone through. Well, not only did they go through that lock, they got into Guntersville, they got into Nickajack, they got through that lock and into what? Into Chickamauga. He was 3 lakes off.
Got one here?
Yes.
The closing of the locks at St. Anthony in Minnesota, was that to stop the silver carp?
Exactly, yeah, go online.
Did it stop the silver carp?
That's a good question. I don't know. All I care about is they stopped it. I'm trying to get it, I don't know. I can't answer the question. I'd have to.
I mean, it would really be important information, wouldn't it be?
Well, yeah, yes it would. I don't know. I can't answer the question. But they closed it for that very reason, to stop the silver carp.
Are they building a barrier?
No. They're never opening that lock again. The headline in the paper was, after 50 years of operation, it's closed for, it's closed. They're never opening that up. And it was a navigation lock. The picture I showed you was a barge going through it. They closed it forever just because of the silver carp. And I'm sure they haven't gotten through because it's closed, but I don't know if they were there before. I can't answer that. So I don't know.
Won't you have to address the human factor too? Some guy taking a silver carp in a bucket, dumping it in another lake?
Well, yes, there's all kinds of, as I mentioned to you, they've got postings all over the place. It is illegal for any fisherman to take bait from from one lake and bring it to another. Here's the reason. A lot of fishermen, now, if you go to a bait seller, you're okay. Because those are commercials, those are not going to be silver carp. But a lot of fishermen use cast nets or traps, and they catch their own minnows rather than buy them. And that's where the problem comes. If you catch them, and you cannot tell a shiner from a young fingerling silver carp. I can, but they're extremely difficult to tell apart. There's a little bit different on their dorsal fin, and there's a little bit of different colorations on their anal area. But it's almost impossible to tell them apart. So yes, if a person went down to Wheeler and caught a bunch of bait and took it all the way up here to Watts Bar, that could do it. But that's probably not going to happen. I give fishermen a lot of credit because they won't do that. Fishermen are too smart. And most people don't catch their own bait. So the answer to your question, yeah, that alone could do it. A bucket of young silver carp would do it. But I don't think that'll happen.
One question.
Okay, so we know this is a problem. What are we supposed to do? What can we do?
Okay.
Are there petitions? Are there people organizing?
I'm all for all of those. I work probably 5 hours a day on this. I've been doing, and we've got so many things going right now. I gave this talk at the second time at the Tellico Yacht Club, and this time was to the fishing group up there. We had over 130 people in there. And they asked me, why don't we protest? Why don't we get a march? Why don't we get 150 boats and go to Watts Bar Lake and lock? And I said, man, count me in. My boat will be there. So there's a lot of things you can do. I think the best thing you can do right now is hammer all your legislatures, including Tim Burchett, who agrees. Let him know you agree. Hammer the governor, Tennessee, say, we need you to close that lock, declare an emergency, or we're going to follow the fate of the land between the lakes. We're talking about a $1.3 billion annual loss, let alone a recreation loss. We're going to have small businesses go out. We're going to have marinas go out of business. We're going to have boat rental agencies going out. It's going to be a horrible economic
And if you can't get through during the day, call at night, because they have to listen to the messages, they have to go through the messages in order to deliver what all has been called in, and that's one of the best times, is to leave a message and then call it again the next day.
Yeah, I want to thank you. We're going to have to start it off now, but thank you very much. That was quite informative. Just have a couple more short announcements, and then we'll go from there. Our buddy organization, Act for America, is going to be having their meeting at the Petro truck stop on February the 27th. And it's going to be Kay Logan talking about childhood education. Is going to be that meeting. Also, the people were asking, we attach the video that's being taken right now to our minutes. So if you get our minutes, look at the bottom of the minutes, and that will be the video of this meeting. Also, that will be posted on the website, so you'll see our minutes, and the video is also on the bottom of that. So that's another way to do it. And if we get any additional information from the professor here, we will put that on the website. So if you have any other questions, you're welcome to come after the meeting and talk to the professor. If you have any questions about our organization, you're welcome to come and talk to me. I want to thank you for your attendance, and we'll see you next week.
Would you send me that link?
Yeah, you're on our mailing list, right?
Okay. I don't know. I don't think so.
Well, we'll get you on our
Get it
list.
to Pandora, and Pandora will get it.
Okay, great. Thank you.